legendary Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I'm sure that needs no introduction to you all. But we have Hayley Tsukayama. She's a legislative activist for the EFF, focusing on state legislation. Prior to joining the EFF, she was 8 years as a consumer and technology reporter at the Washington Post, writing stories on the industry's largest companies. Hayley has an MA in journalism from the University of Missouri and a BA in history from Vassar College, and she was a 2010 recipient of the White House Correspondents Association Scholarship. Hayley, thank you.
Hello. Good evening. As was in my introduction, my name is Hayley Tsukayama, and I am legislative activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. For those of you who may not know EFF, it is the leading nonprofit advocacy organization for digital rights. We accomplish our advocacy in 3 basic ways. One, through impact litigation, so suing people. One, by building technical tools to protect consumers, and also by working with folks like you to lift up consumer voices. I work on the activism team and specifically spend my time talking with, sometimes yelling at, mostly politely yelling at, state legislators, including here in California. Thank you. To enact laws that protect all of our rights. I'm also a very nervous public speaker, so breathe with me a little bit. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about some of the amazing grassroots movement we've been seeing fighting against the government's use, particularly of face recognition systems, which we refer to as face surveillance. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about growing momentum around more general consumer privacy law in the US, and I'll close with some thoughts on how you can push back against invasive government surveillance and fight to protect your privacy overall. Privacy is a pretty important topic to me. I've actually only been at EFF a little more than a year, as was mentioned in my intro. Before that, I was a consumer technology reporter at the Washington Post. I did beat coverage for Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, sort of all of the companies, and I followed their earnings reports and their product launches and sort of all of that typical business news. I truly believe the job of a journalist is to tell people as accurately as possible how the world is, but after nearly a decade of covering those companies, I was getting pretty frustrated, particularly on the privacy front, with how the world was, and I wanted to start talking about how it should be, so that's how I landed at EFF. It can be really easy for people to look at their lives and their communities and feel as if privacy is a lost cause. Every creepy ad that follows you, every breach notification, every street corner camera can make it feel like privacy is gone. But even in the year that I've been at EFF, we've seen some amazing shifts in momentum when it comes to privacy, and for people pushing back against the idea that they have to let government and companies into their lives this way. Perhaps most notable among these has been the pushback against government use of face surveillance. Face surveillance, which is what we say to refer to the use of face recognition technology, particularly by governments, is one of the most pernicious and pervasive forms of surveillance. That's part of the reason why we have thrown our support behind immediate bans and moratoria on government use of this technology. The collection of facial images draws a target on government systems, which are not the best at cybersecurity for cyber criminals. Of course, having your image of your face stolen is arguably worse than having your credit card or your username or something you can change stolen. It's also arguably more troubling than even a fingerprint system because you can't lift a fingerprint off of a Facebook image, for example. There are also technical problems with this technology. It's currently not that accurate, particularly when it comes to identifying those with darker skin, children, the elderly, or women. So that's actually a large group of people. Nor is the training provided to law enforcement on how to use these tools often that well done. So this leads to face surveillance being used to further existing biases present in current policing, covered with the false veneer of objectivity because folks focus on the fact that the decisions are ostensibly made by algorithm rather than remembering that humans have to design that algorithm and implement that algorithm. So we also work a lot on ethical use of designing algorithms and auditing a lot of pushes for being able to audit algorithms. But even if these problems could be solved, we would still oppose government use of face surveillance. The ability to identify and then track people as they go about their daily lives is deeply disturbing at its heart. And not only does face surveillance violate privacy, it also chills protest. San Francisco, in May of this year, became the first city in the country to ban local government use of face surveillance. By October, it was followed by Oakland and Berkeley. EFF joined with a lot of organizations, notably the ACLU of Northern California and Oakland Privacy, in support of those bans. Having those bans in place is a huge win, and this action is not confined to California. Other states, particularly Massachusetts, where the cities of Somerville and Brookline have now passed bans, have also taken up the call. Both Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon are also considering bans. We've seen state legislatures answer constituent concerns about this technology. Massachusetts, again, is currently considering an indefinite statewide moratorium, which would stop the government use of face surveillance until the legislature enacts an authorizing statute. Right here in California, Governor Newsom this year signed a bill sponsored by Assembly Member Phil Ting, AB 1215, that places a 3-year moratorium on the use of face surveillance on police body-worn cameras, as well as any cameras carried by police. And that was, we just really didn't want to see this tool that some people had advocated for as an accountability measure be turned into a system for surveillance. That bill goes into effect in January, and the city of San Diego said earlier this month that it will stop one of the country's largest and oldest law enforcement face recognition programs in compliance with that law, so starting in January. There's also been a great push for more general consumer data privacy legislation across the country. Right here in California, of course, tens of thousands of people signed on to support a ballot initiative in 2018 that demanded stronger protections for their privacy. That initiative eventually became the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, which is a historic law. Starting next month, January 2020, CCPA grants 3 baseline privacy rights to Californians: a right to access the information that companies have collected about them, a right to ask for that information to be deleted, and the right to opt out of the sale of that personal information. As I said, that law passed last year, goes into effect in January. There's been a gap in between in this past legislative session, thanks in part to the support of people writing into offices of their lawmakers. EFF stood alongside a number of groups dedicated to protecting consumers, workers' rights, and immigrants' rights, and fighting off well-funded attempts, I'm not going to say by who, to weaken that law. It was a long fight to defend CCPA so that it could go into effect largely as it was passed. CCPA is a really historic and important law and provides a good foundation to build on when it comes to protecting our privacy, but there are many ways it can and should be stronger, including making sure it has enforcement to back up its bark with some bite. We're currently working with a strong group of privacy advocates to introduce bills to strengthen that law and build on that foundation and fight off more attempts to weaken it. It's going to be a fun session, is what I'm saying. What I really want to leave you with tonight, though, is the reminder that you can push back and that it doesn't have to be like this. I truly understand, particularly when companies are pushing consumers and the government to purchase even more invasive pieces of technology, how easy it can feel, like you just can't do anything. But I've seen firsthand in the past year that lawmakers are listening to people who speak up in their cities, in their states, and across the country. EFF is currently running a campaign called About Face. That's EFF.org/aboutface. That petitions city officials for local bans across the country. Local bans build momentum. You may think, well, if a city bans it, it's not that big a deal. But local bans actually do build a lot of momentum. In California, when we were working on 1215, certainly having San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley saying, we don't want this in our communities, really helped our advocacy at the state level. In Massachusetts, seeing those cities also step up is really helping the advocacy in passing the statewide moratorium. So, yes, we're asking folks in larger cities across the country to sign on to these petitions, and then we're delivering them in multiples of 100 to local governments. So feel free to add your name to those petitions. And if your city is smaller and not on our list, we are encouraging folks to send messages to their state legislators. So I really encourage you to take your frustration and channel it into action. You can start in your own home with your purchasing decisions. You can start in your own community. You can get involved with great groups such as Ethics and Tech, sign petitions, show up at city council meetings, send letters, make calls. This sort of thing really, truly matters, as we've seen in cities across the country this year. So thanks for listening. Thanks to Ethics and Tech for asking me to speak, and please enjoy your evening.